welcome to the Witch's Cauldron. My name is Paula. Today's subject is rituals and how to construct them. This is part of my Wicca 101 class. So let's get into it. There are certain things that you want to remember when you are constructing rituals and constructing your spells, because they're two different things. Rituals are centered around the Sabbats, the wheel of the year, and usually involve work on you and specifically honoring the divine. Okay. So this isn't really a time when you want to do things like prosperity spells, love spells, that kind of stuff, okay? This is where you want to do and incorporate things into the ritual where you want to work on you, and that theme fits in with the correspondences and the theme for that Sabbat, okay? And think of a Sabbat and these rituals as like a Christian going to, church for Christmas candlelight or Easter service, something like that, or Ash Wednesday. Or, a Jew going to synagogue for Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, etc. So you want to think of these as like your, what I call high holy days. And then your spells are like, I hate to say it because it's kind of cliche, but they're prayers with props. Okay. In other words, you do a spell to work with energy, manifest and build energy. Then you focus that energy for a specific intent. And then once it has built, you release it into the universe to manifest the change that you want to see. Like, a prosperity spell, something like that, healing, etc., etc., etc. I'll tell you right now, I'm not real super big on love spells because a lot of times people make the mistake of saying that they want to get someone in particular to be interested in them. And anything that affects another's free will, that's kind of going the gray to black magic side of things. So, I don't mind going into the gray to protect my family, protect those that I love, protect my home, animals, etc., etc. I don't mind going into the gray to issue a witch slap to another witch that has directed something my way. In other words, reverse the curse or uncross or bind someone from hurting me. I usually stay in the light. I don't routinely walk in the gray and don't even go to the point of like controlling spirit or anything like that to do my bidding. I may ask my ancestors to join a ritual. I may ask my ancestors to help protect me, and family members, but that's all directed toward me and not outward to someone else where I'm asking spirit to go and do harm to someone else. I usually stay in the light. So with that said, so one of the first things you really want to do when you're writing a ritual or a spell is to think about the intent of that spell or ritual. What is your purpose? And then you need to kind of do a little bit of research, and that involves correspondences. Now, correspondences are items like herbs, gems, gods and goddesses, altar items, tarot cards, zodiac signs, animals, things like that, that can help focus your intent and manifest what you want to have happen. So there are two correspondences books that I highly, highly recommend. And the first one is by Llewellyn Publishing, and it is Llewellyn's Complete Book of Correspondences. And this is what it looks like. This is readily available. It was written by Sandra Kynes, and it is readily available on Amazon. And it's not all that expensive. I think you can pick up some used copies and stuff from Amazon. You can always look on eBay and stuff like that, or Thrift Books is another source where you can get books a little bit cheaper. And the second one is by Eileen Holland, and it's Holland's Grimoire of Magical Correspondences. And this one is available on Amazon. They have some on there that aren't too expensive. I want to say there was a couple, when I checked the other day, there were a couple on there for the $15 to $20 range. And I believe this one is now available in Kindle format also. So if you prefer digital books, then there you go. You can do that. I am an old geezer, and I like my hard copy books. Now, this one is arranged solely by intent from A to Z. And then it gives you, you know, everything under the sun for just about every intent that you can imagine. There are very few intent that I have in my 15 years of practice that I have not found something in this book. Because I bought this book when it was first published, 2006. So this book is 12 years old now. It is no longer in print. So most of what you find, you can find some that are new. They are ridiculously priced. I mean, like hundreds of dollars. Especially, I think there was one on there that was like $300, and I almost flipped out. So, but you can find it. You can find really good, you know, used versions of it. It might have a few highlights in it. Might be a little dog-eared because it's 12 years old, but it's worth every penny. But do not spend $300 on a copy of it on Amazon, because I do believe there were some copies like in the $15 range on Thrift Books also. I did not check eBay. The Llewellyn's one is arranged. It's arranged by intent. So you can see like the intent is magic continued over here. And then it also goes into like specific herbs and its, you know, associations and intent. Then it goes into, it's got gemstones by their intent. It's got animals, you know, sea creatures, and then animals by their intent. Let's see, what else do we have? They've got birds, they've got mythical creatures, they've got goddesses and gods, they've got angels, astrological signs, the zodiac, planetary rulings, and Pluto is still a planet. for magical consideration, timing by month, by time of day, by the lunar cycle, by the seasons, by the hour of the day, specific dates, and what the correspondences are. In that specifically, it's got a section for like the wheel of the year and what the correspondences are for that specific Sabbat. It's also got direction, color, magic, chakras, and number correspondences, numerology correspondences. So this, you can see my dog ears in those two books, that those two are well used and really loved in my collection. And there are also a couple of good sites on the internet that I have found. I will list them in the description box. You know, one of them is about pagan Wiccan. They have some good correspondences on there. And I believe there's one that's called like Pathos Pagan, I think is what it is. Anyway, I'm going to link a couple of sites in the description box. I'm going to warn you that some of the websites are wacky, and that's all I'm saying. And there are plenty of sites out there that will charge you an arm and a leg, literally, to take classes, like, you know, $125 per video session. And I just think that's kind of redonkulous in my world. You know, I always said that my, you know, HP deserved to get a fee for her time presenting the class, and that's my way of honoring her for her knowledge and her time and everything like that. But my classes cost, when I first started out, they were $10 a class, and that basically just covered her printing costs. And then, you know, toward the end, because I took various types of classes with her and our head high priest. And toward the end, I think they were like $20 a session, but they're still just $20 a session 10, 12 years later. So beware of anyone who is charging an exorbitant amount to help you construct rituals, teach you how to do it, and things like that. So after you have figured out what you want to do and what you need, it helps to have a worksheet to write all of this stuff down, especially when you're starting out. You don't really want to do what I call freestyle. You can do that a little bit later on in your practice. But in the handout, there will be a worksheet. There will be a link to a Google Doc with the handouts for this session, for this class. And in that handout, there will be a worksheet. You know, I think I'll set the settings so that you can print it out. So if you can't, either DM me or leave a comment below the video telling me that the link didn't work right, and I'll try and fix it, because I don't use Google Docs other than for this class, so I'm not that familiar with it, so bear with me, okay? So on the worksheet, it'll see, okay, what kind of supplies do I need? And that means everything from your altar cloth and the color of the altar cloth, decorations that you include on the altar, plus, you know, what are you going to use for an incense? Are you going to blend your own incense? What colors of candles do you want on there? Do you want, you know, the silver one for the goddess and a gold one for the god and a white one for your altar candle? Do you want them all to be white? Do you, I mean, So think about that kind of stuff. What are the next thing are what are your elemental correspondences going to be? There are sometimes, like at IMBOLC, which is also called candle moss, my elemental correspondences are all candles in colors corresponding to that cardinal direction. So my altar for IMBOLC is really heavy with candles. So think about that. What are your elemental correspondences? What ritual items do you need? You know, are you going to use a wand or an athame to cast your circle? Are you going to need your, are you going to do cakes and ale? You're going to need a chalice. You're going to need an offering bowl or a plate. You're going to need to have like a bowl or something to hold the incense that you blend. You're going to need something to smudge your ritual area, you know, before you begin. You're going to probably need a cauldron and a heat safe plate, something to keep, you know, your tabletop from burning or melting something underneath it. You can also, and it's important that you include things like gemstones, and include something that is personal to you. Like on my altar, I have an elemental bottle that I did, oh God, 15 years ago. It is rather haggard looking, but those correspondences to the elements inside the bottle are specific to me. And then it's got a scroll inside that I wrote to the elements and the elementals. And then it's been sealed up and been in use since like week 7 of my training, so like 15 years now. I also have ashes from my familiar who passed away a few years ago, so that he's always with me. And you know, my dogs that are here and you see running around in the back here, they are my familiars now, but there was a very special bond with this one dog. Also, I have my healing stones on there, and those stay on my altar all the time. So, because that's really more of the focus of my spell work and my ritual work is healing. So, think about everything that you want on your altar. And if you have to, you know, do a little sketch of everything that you want. You want to get together all of your supplies, and don't forget something to light the candles if you're using candles, and don't forget something to snuff out candles, because it's really not good form to blow a candle out when it's part of your altar. You know, you really don't want to be blowing your air across, you know, a candle that's there to honor a god or a goddess. You can print out a picture of a god or a goddess. Are you doing something that's incorporating something else like a tarot card or things like that? You know, you can use printouts on there. Do you need something that's heat safe to burn something? A lot of the rituals that I do, I write things down and on paper and put them in my cauldron with charcoal discs. I buy the Three Kings discs, charcoal discs like you would use in a hookah pipe. But they're also great. The instant light discs are wonderful to put inside your cauldron and burn your incense and burn, you know, things that you want to release, etc., etc. And, you know, it's always good when you're burning things to add saltpeter, because anything that makes stuff go and flame up when it burns is good in my book. And so if I'm ever doing anything like that, and if you're doing something like you're releasing, you need paper. You also need, you know, a pen to write things down. So really think down to the minutia of what you really need, okay? Before you begin any ritual and physically get ready to perform the ritual, you want to meditate for a little bit, ground and center, and then smudge yourself or have already taken a ritual bath. You also have to smudge the area yourself, you know, that you're doing everything, your sacred space. You also want to anoint your body when you get to your altar. And that's typically done with a little bottle of, you know, essential oils that are in a base of something like grapeseed, avocado, olive oil in a pinch, couple of drops of essential oils, or have already, you know, put herbs in there to have them infuse for the couple of days prior. You can do that. And then you anoint your forehead right over your third chakra in the sign of a pentagram if you're Wiccan or witch. You can use runes, or you can use the sign of the cross if you're a Christian witch. Just depends on where your path is taking you. Then comes the first thing, is your circle casting. Now, your circle casting, some traditions have you start in the north, some traditions have you start in the east, and those traditions have different cardinal point assignments for the elements for air and earth. So depending on your tradition, I always start in the east with air, and then you go something that's called DEOSIL, and that's DEOSIL, but it's pronounced JOSL, and that means clockwise or to the right. Okay, and then the next thing you want to do, and your circle casting is your way of protecting your ritual, to keep negative energy, negative entities out. So you really want to take time to craft this. And I crafted one many, many years ago. I have since modified it slightly over the years, but the core of my circle casting is the same one that I did 15 years ago. And it just becomes an automatic part of my ritual. And this is where you not only physically draw a protective circle around things, with either a wand or an athame. I tend to use an athame because the knife is more forceful than a wand is. I often say, you know, an athame is more forceful. So it's kind of like invoking something and not asking something, when a wand is more like asking something. You're being more forceful with an athame. So after the circle casting in your ritual, what you want to do is then invite the elements. Now, as a beginning practitioner, I do not recommend that you call elementals. There is a difference between calling elemental air and calling a sylph. to come to your ritual and work with that elemental. You can, as a new magical practitioner, inadvertently, if you call an elemental to your ritual and you don't release it properly, that's malignant magic, and that can cause that elemental to wreak havoc on your life. And I have known people who didn't know what they were doing, and they were, you know, trying to conjure and do all kinds of stuff. They had never had any training, and they ended up with fire and water elementals attached to their property, and their houses' pipes would burst for no reason. There would be electrical issues for no reason. Their house caught fire 3 different times. It burnt to the ground. And then when it was rebuilt, the rebuilt house burned to the ground and had flooding issues. So when someone was telling me about that, I was like, did someone practice magic in that house? And they're like, oh yeah, you know, our you know, son messed around with the blah 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 blah. And I'm like, you had 2 elementals that were bound to the property. They're not ever going to go away until you have a magical practitioner go there and take control of those elementals and release them back to where they belong, because someone had bound them inadvertently to the property and they didn't know what they were doing. So be very, very careful. It's very different calling elemental air to provide energy and a certain intent. It is another thing to call an elemental into your ritual and have them there. So as you're starting out, please do not invoke any of the elementals. No sylphs, no salamanders, no ondines or undines, however you want to pronounce it, and no gnomes. So just remember that. The next thing you want to do is call the god and the goddess. And your elemental callings, look in the correspondences for the intent that you want those elements to bring to a particular ritual, because there are some times when the Sabbat calls for a little bit different. So I basically have the same structure for calling each of the elements, but the intent that I include in that structure may vary just a little bit based on that particular ritual. Like if I'm doing a specific healing ritual with a very specific person that has a specific disease, I will probably change that elemental calling to match that intent for that disease that I'm trying to do a healing for. So after you call your elements, you call the divine. You invite the god and the goddess into your circle. You do the goddess first, and then the god. The goddess's candle is on the left side of your altar. The god is on the right. It's silver for the goddess and gold for the god. Typically, you have already at the beginning of your ritual a white altar candle. In between those two, you use that altar candle to light the god and the goddess candles. I typically do not use something like a lighter on my god and goddess candles. I just personally think that that's kind of disrespectful. So I pick up those candles and physically, you know, light them off my main altar candle. After that, your circle is cast, the elements are there, the divine is there. This is now the time to call specific, if you want to call a specific, you know, god or goddess to the ritual. If you want to bring your ancestors, invite your ancestors to join the ritual. If you have a spirit animal, a totem, something like that, this is the time to invite them to the ritual. Then you get to the meat of the ritual for whatever the Sabbat is. After you do the meat of your ritual, means for you to ground and center is to have what is called cakes and ale. These are in essence an offering to the divine, okay? You don't have to have cake and you do not have to have ale, okay? There are, some practitioners who have had issues with alcohol abuse in the past, so they use juice of some type and stay away from all alcoholic products. Some of them, like on IMBOLC, since IMBOLC is in the milk, will have milk, sweetened milk. Milk with a little bit of honey in it. Some, like at Llewellyn and Llewellyn, do mulled cider. Rocky's saying hello, everyone. He needs a nap. He's being a poop. Anyway, sorry about that. So the very first, and then your cakes can either be, a cake, a bread, a cracker of some kind. If I'm, doing one of my low carb things, it can be cheese, it can be fruit, it can be, a vegetable, depending on what kind of Sabbat you're doing. It doesn't have to be like a sweet bread or anything like that. Okay. It's just a little bite of something to help you ground and center. It's also an offering to the divine and thanking them for the bounty and the blessings that you have received. So, typically when you do cakes, that is honoring the God, okay? And you say, something to the effect, I thank the God for... You need to lay down, young man. You leave your brother alone. You leave your brother alone because you're being a snotty poop. Okay. Go lay down. Go lay down. There you are. Okay. So the very first bite of the food goes into typically my cauldron as an offering to the God. And, I thank the God for the abundance. I thank him for his life. And then I say something so that we may never hunger. And then the first bite goes into the cauldron for the God. Then the second is the ale, and that is taking, a sip. The very first sip goes into a cauldron or an offering bowl, depending on what you want to do. It's honoring the goddess. So, thank you for the fertility and abundance, blah, blah, blah. And then say something like, so we may never thirst. Couple of drops in the cauldron. You take a sip. You can, sit there and go back and forth between, cakes and ale. If you have, I usually leave some left over. And then I put them in an offering bowl outside. And if it's something that won't hurt the animals, I just leave it on my front porch. And then the next morning, I take it out and bury it along with my ashes and everything from the cauldron from the night before. I take it all out in one place, go bury it, and be done. Okay. If you live in an urban environment, you can actually, you know, put stuff down the drain or flush it down the toilet. Just do it in a very respectful manner, because you may not have access to be able to go out, you know, and dig somewhere to bury stuff. So after cakes and ale is when you start. After cakes and ale is when you start shutting the ritual down. Okay, so you go in the reverse order of how you called or invoked them. Okay, so you want to release, you know, your spirit animal, your totem, your ancestors, you know, release them back to the magical realm. Okay, then you do the god, then you release the goddess. Okay, now after that you release the elements, and you do them in reverse order. So you start with the north and you go WIDDERSHINS, which is counterclockwise. Okay, so you know, you release the north, go around counterclockwise until you end up in the, you know, east with air. Okay, so the last thing that you really want to do is to bring down your circle, and be sure when you release the god and the goddess and the elements that you say you release them back to their magical realm until you meet again. Okay, and then say something very respectful, like, you know, farewell and blessed be. On the invocation, you would have said something like blessings and welcome. Okay, then the very last thing that you want to do, you know, if you're using candles as you release, you snuff them out with a candle snuffer. You don't want to blow them out. Okay, that's kind of disrespectful. Same thing with the god and the goddess. Use a candle snuffer. Okay. The last thing you do is bring down your circle. And I always end my ritual with merry we did meet, merry we will part, until we merry meet again. So mote it be. And then I stomp with one foot. And that helps release any excess energy that you did not ground, you know, because during the ritual part, you're raising energy and you're releasing for a specific intent for that Sabbat. Okay. Now, spell work is a little bit different. Okay. Rituals are very regimented. You know, they have a specific order to invoke or call. They have a very specific order to release. You know, it's a lot more involved. Spells, you know, can be done just about anywhere. I've done spells in my car to find a daggone parking space. Thank you, Dorothy Morrison. I love you for that spell. I believe that's in her Everyday Magic, her Everyday Magic book. If you don't have that one, pick it up. But they've also been very involved and taken as much work to organize, write, and look up the correspondences, especially if I'm doing a very healing for a very particular disease. Those take a lot more planning and work than doing something on the fly. Okay, you know, a 60-second spell by taking a bay leaf and putting it in your wallet to bring more money in and make sure that your wallet is never without cash is really quick down and dirty, easy to do. Okay. So it depends on the kind of spell that you want, but usually it involves casting a circle. You do not have to invoke the god and the goddess. You do not have to call the elements. None of that. You get down to the meat of what you want to do, okay? And it's all depending on what you want. So you write your spell based on what intent. You have a way to raise energy. You can raise energy through chanting, through drumming, through dancing, through sex magic. You know, you raise energy by having sex, and then it's released at the time of orgasm. It just depends on what kind of spell you want to do and what you want to accomplish. After the spell is done and over, you bring your circle down. Okay. Now, for both spells and rituals, you want to let everything burn down. Okay. So, you know, you have the little like 4-inch spell candles. You want to let them burn all the way down on a spell until they extinguish themselves. And you want to make sure that, you know, you keep an eye on candles when they're burning. Don't leave them unattended, please. You don't need to burn everything down doing stuff like that. Make sure if you're using candle magic that you have a, you know, fireproof. Sometimes I even use a cookie sheet to do a candle magic spell on, because that makes it easier. After the spell is over, everything is burned down. Everything is cooled off. The ashes in your cauldron are cooled off. The charcoal discs are well, you know, cooled. Maybe usually more than 24 hours for me, because, you know, I'm just a nut and making sure stuff is not hot and can't rekindle. Then I take everything outside and I bury it to help manifest whatever it is. Sometimes if you're banishing something, make sure that you do not bury whatever it is on your property. If you're banishing something from your property and you bury it on your property, it's still on your property and it's still your problem. Okay? If you're, seriously, if you're, you know, banishing, you know, evil from your house, you know, doing the old coffin nails and taking them out and doing evil to ground, and, you know, doing evil to ground 3 times with a coffin nail for each one and hammering it into the ground with a hammer, and, you know, binding evil to ground. You don't want to do that on your own property. Go somewhere far away, you know, go way, way far away to do that kind of nonsense. You don't want to have any part of it anywhere near you. So remember to do that. But always, you know, your offerings, anything like that, anything that's left over, I always make sure I have leftovers. Leave it out for the animals, for the divine. Sometimes if I'm working with, say, HECATE, I take everything out on a biodegradable paper plate, leave it at a crossroads, and then I go back the next day. If there's anything left, then I take it and I bury whatever's left, you know. But usually the divine and critters have come by and the crossroads and taken advantage of what is there. So you want to make sure if you invoke anything, these are the hard, fast rules. If you invoke or call anything, you have to release them. Otherwise, you create malignant magic. Be very careful not to try to affect anyone's free will. When you start doing that, then that, especially as a new magical practitioner, you run the risk of crossing the line and going into the dark. And once you embrace the dark, it's very hard to come back to the white or the light. Okay. So with that, my friends, Be sure to check the handouts below. In the description box, the link to the Google Doc. It will have some basic correspondences in there, and it will have a ritual worksheet and spell worksheet. So with that, my friends, merry we did meet, merry we will part, until we merry meet again. And even Rocky is saying goodbye here. You just saw his little nose popping up here. So be sure to subscribe before you leave and hit that like button. And farewell and blessed be. Be well and walk in love and light, everybody.